When I moved into Pineview Estates, it was supposed to be my quiet sanctuary away from the stress of undercover work. Being a detective who frequently infiltrated dangerous criminal networks, I had learned to appreciate quiet neighborhoods, places where people walked their dogs, waved friendly greetings, and asked questions that weren't too probing. Pineview Estates seemed exactly like that: peaceful, ordinary, comfortably suburban. The lawns were immaculately trimmed, mailboxes freshly painted, and every home had matching address plaques adorned with quaint, stylized numbers. It was picturesque, almost comically perfect. Then there was Karen. I first met Karen during my second day in the neighborhood. She was walking down the sidewalk with a clipboard in hand, her eyes meticulously scanning each property. She wore a determined expression, the kind of look a soldier might have while inspecting troops, and she marched up my driveway without hesitation. She greeted me with an excessively cheerful voice, introducing herself as president of the Homeowners Association, and immediately launched into a well-rehearsed speech about maintaining the community's standards, its image, and its harmony. Her presentation came complete with pamphlets detailing the neighborhood's guidelines, rules, and expectations. I politely listened, nodding occasionally to show engagement, but gently declined when she urged me to sign the paperwork joining the HOA. Karen's friendly mask slipped just for a moment, revealing a flash of irritation, a tightening of her eyes and lips, before she plastered a forced smile back onto her face. "Of course, joining is optional," she said stiffly, "but most residents find it beneficial for community cohesion." I smiled back, equally polite and equally firm in my refusal. "I appreciate the information, Karen, but I prefer to keep things simple. I'll follow neighborhood standards, but I prefer not being officially involved." Karen paused briefly, clearly weighing her next move, then recovered smoothly. "I understand," she said, her voice now syrupy and sweet, "but sometimes independence has its price. Do reconsider." That first conversation left an unpleasant taste in my mouth, but I brushed it off as just another encounter with someone overly invested in petty suburban politics. However, as days turned into weeks, Karen's presence in my life became unavoidable. She monitored my property obsessively, leaving passive-aggressive notes about trivial violations, my mailbox color, the precise length of my grass, and the parking arrangement of my beloved Ferrari. My car was one of my few luxuries, a carefully chosen reward for years of dangerous assignments and personal sacrifices. It represented freedom, independence, and perhaps a hint of rebellion, a statement that I refused to blend completely into conformity. Unfortunately, that statement seemed to antagonize Karen more than anything else. As tensions slowly rose, I never imagined her anger would escalate to something so vicious, so destructive, and so utterly reckless. Pineview Estates had been my haven, but soon it would become the site of an unimaginable nightmare. Karen wasted no time reminding me that my decision to opt out of the HOA had placed me squarely in her crosshairs. It began subtly enough, with brief, uncomfortable encounters on morning walks or overly cheerful waves from across the street, her eyes never leaving mine, lingering just a moment too long, hinting at her simmering displeasure beneath the polite facade. Soon, however, her tactics became more overt. It started with polite notes tucked under the windshield wiper of my Ferrari, gentle reminders about keeping the car parked inside the garage rather than out front. When I failed to follow her, demands there was nothing in the official neighborhood regulations that mandated garage parking her messages became increasingly curt. They appeared almost daily, each one typed meticulously and printed on pristine HOA stationery. Each note carried a slightly sharper edge than the last, pointing out minute violations that even the most eagle-eyed inspector would ignore. The shade of my mailbox paint was deemed slightly off-white instead of eggshell, as prescribed by the HOA guidelines. My trash bins were left at the curbside precisely 15 minutes too long one Thursday evening, resulting in a lengthy letter highlighting my disregard for community standards. But Karen didn't limit her harassment to letters alone. One afternoon, as I watered my flower beds, I spotted her across the street, clipboard once again in hand, openly scrutinizing my property. She pretended surprise when she caught my eye, then approached with that artificially cheerful expression she always wore when delivering criticism. "Such lovely flowers," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "It's a shame your landscaping doesn't quite match the community. Approved color palette. Perhaps you overlooked the memo." I assured her politely that I'd received no such memo and that my flower choices weren't harming anyone. Karen's forced smile tightened visibly. "Rules exist for everyone's benefit," she said tersely. "Your neighbors would appreciate it if you respected them." She walked away, leaving the threat hanging unspoken in the air between us. I knew it then. Karen wouldn't stop until I surrendered, or she found a way to punish me for my independence. Things took a darker turn when the passive-aggressive notes turned into outright warnings. I came home one evening to find a printed citation taped to my front door. It was folded neatly in a plastic sleeve, the kind used to protect important documents. This one accused me of violating community visual standards by having excessive personal expression displayed on my property. The offense? A small flag on my porch that read, "Free to be." I had put it up more out of habit than statement, but Karen saw it as a challenge to her authority. That same week, I began noticing small changes around my property. The edges of my lawn, which I meticulously kept trimmed, were suddenly littered with dry leaves, even though no trees on my lot had shed any. My trash cans, once emptied by the collectors, were found tipped over by the curb, their contents scattered in ways that suggested more than just clumsy handling. It was too precise, too intentional. Neighbors started avoiding eye contact when I passed, and conversations would lower in volume when I walked near. Karen's influence was beginning to reach further than just me. I tried to ignore it, keeping my head down, following the basic community rules out of respect for the peace I hoped to maintain. But every small infraction, every silent judgment, began to build. One morning, I discovered a letter from the Unofficial Compliance Committee, a group that seemed to have formed overnight. It warned of escalating action if I continued to resist full integration into HOA expectations. There was no signature, just the committee's title typed in bold at the bottom. The tension wasn't just professional anymore. It had begun to feel personal. Karen had created an atmosphere of quiet hostility, and I could feel the pressure mounting with each interaction. What should have been a quiet, uneventful chapter of my life had started to feel more like an investigation. Only this time, I was the one being watched. Still, I said nothing. I watched. I recorded. After years of undercover work, I knew when someone was setting the stage for a bigger move. Karen wasn't done. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be subtle. By the third week, it became clear Karen wasn't content with her campaign of intimidation. I started to notice her walking past my house at odd hours, always with that same clipboard, always looking just a little too long at my windows, my car, my front lawn. I would catch glimpses of her through the blinds, pausing near my mailbox or pretending to inspect a bush at the edge of my yard. She rarely knocked, never called, but she was always around. I installed a few discreet cameras, the kind no homeowner would notice unless they were looking. Not because I felt threatened, but because the behavior had shifted from annoying to suspicious. I'd spent years developing instincts for when people were hiding something, or pushing boundaries. Karen had crossed that line. The footage confirmed what I suspected. She was coming closer each night, standing on the edge of my driveway, sometimes taking photos with her phone. Once, just after midnight, she actually walked onto my porch. She didn't ring the doorbell. She stood there for nearly 2 minutes, staring at the front door before walking away. It was eerie, unsettling in a way that professional threats rarely are. Those were straightforward. This was personal and unhinged. I didn't say anything to her. Confrontation at this point would have only pushed her to retreat or disguise her actions better. I needed to see what she was building toward. In the meantime, I filed quiet complaints through unofficial channels, tracking every interaction, every incident, documenting everything as if it were a case file. That level of discipline had saved me more than once. One afternoon, while reviewing footage, I saw her stop her car in front of my driveway and simply sit there for 10 minutes, staring at the house. No movement, no calls, just watching. That was the moment I realized she wasn't trying to enforce rules anymore. She was watching for something, waiting for something, or maybe trying to decide what she would do next. Whatever it was, I had the sense she was getting ready to act, and I knew from experience that people like Karen don't just back down, they escalate. It happened just after 2 in the morning. I was asleep, deep enough that I didn't hear the initial crackling or the distant shouts. What woke me was the pounding on my front door. Not the polite kind either. It was frantic, full of urgency, the kind that jolts you upright before your mind even catches up. I grabbed a robe and moved quickly through the house, my instincts on high alert. The moment I opened the door, the heat hit me like a wave. Flames lit up the front yard like a violent sunrise. My Ferrari, parked at the edge of the driveway, was fully engulfed. The fire had already consumed the hood and was working its way toward the cabin, the paint blistering and peeling in waves. The popping of the tires echoed down the block, and smoke coiled into the night sky in dark plumes. A few neighbors had gathered at a distance, some filming, some simply staring. One of them, a guy from 2 doors down, shouted that he had called the fire department. I didn't move at first. I stood there barefoot on the porch, watching the flames devour something that had once brought me joy. The car wasn't just expensive. It was a symbol of something I had earned, a reminder that I'd survived years of putting my life on the line. It was the one thing I owned that didn't serve a function beyond making me feel alive. The fire crew arrived within minutes. They moved fast, laying out hoses, shouting commands, but by then the damage was done. The car was a charred shell. The aluminum wheels had melted, the glass had shattered, and what was left of the interior was blackened and unrecognizable. I gave them space, watching with arms folded as the water turned the flames to smoke and steam. Karen arrived as the last of the fire died out. She wore a robe and slippers, holding a mug of something warm, pretending to be just another concerned neighbor. Her face was a little too composed, her expressions rehearsed. She stood beside the others, offering hollow condolences. "What a terrible thing," she said softly. "This neighborhood used to be so peaceful." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her eyes flicked to mine just a second too long, and I saw it. The satisfaction she tried to bury beneath the performance. She wasn't worried. She was proud. She thought she had won. The next morning, the smell of smoke still clung to the air like it had seeped into the walls. Ash and blackened rubber littered the edge of the driveway, and what remained of the Ferrari was nothing more than twisted metal and scorched plastic. The fire inspector came by just before noon, clipboard in hand, walking slow circles around the wreck. He made small notes, occasionally glancing up at me as I stood nearby. We spoke briefly. He said the preliminary signs pointed to arson. Accelerant had been used. The fire didn't start from the engine or wiring. It had been deliberate. That word settled into my chest like a stone. Deliberate. I already knew it was no accident, but hearing someone else say it out loud changed something. It shifted the weight of the incident from tragedy to attack, and it narrowed the list of suspects to just one name: Karen. She didn't come by that day. No knock on the door, no follow-up concern, no community-wide email offering support or sympathy. But she didn't hide either. Around midday, I saw her walking her dog past the remains of the car. She didn't even glance at it. She just kept walking, her posture stiff, her head held high, like it was beneath her to acknowledge. I filed a police report out of formality, knowing full well how far that would go without evidence. The officer was polite but uninterested, jotting down the basics and assuring me someone would follow up if anything developed. I thanked him, but I knew that call would never come. That night, I reviewed the footage from my cameras again, this time frame by frame. I focused on the side yard, where there was a gap in visibility. Nothing definitive showed up, just a flicker of movement shortly before the fire started. A figure in a hoodie, moving low and fast. No face, no clear image, but the size and gait were familiar. She thought she had covered her tracks. She thought no one would suspect her if she acted just like everyone else. But I wasn't just another neighbor, and I wasn't planning to let her get away with it. The fire had taken my car. Now I was going to take back control. I spent the next few days in silence, not out of grief but out of calculation. My instincts had already taken over. Every hour Karen wasn't being watched was an hour she might erase her tracks, scrub her devices, delete messages, clean her garage. So I moved fast but quietly. I dug through every second of surveillance footage I had, ran enhancement software through old law enforcement contacts under the radar, and flagged anything that didn't belong. I set up additional cameras, the kind designed for wildlife tracking. Small, almost invisible, infrared. I mounted them under the eaves, in the trees, even buried one in the lawn facing the street. It wasn't paranoia, it was procedure. While I was at it, I took a walk. I stopped by a few neighbors' houses under the guise of being a concerned victim. I asked if they had seen or heard anything suspicious the night of the fire. Most offered sympathy but little help. A few were clearly nervous. Not about me, but about getting involved. One neighbor, a teenager 2 houses down, mentioned he had a security camera pointed toward the street. I asked if he minded me taking a quick look. He shrugged and brought me inside. The footage was gold. At 2:03 a.m., a figure approached my driveway from the side road. They moved low, wearing dark clothes, hoodie up. They carried something in their right hand. They paused briefly, looked around, then disappeared off-screen toward my yard. 3 minutes later, a flicker of light began to grow, and the figure ran back out the way they came. Not enough to make a full identification, but it confirmed everything I needed. Someone had walked in with an accelerant and walked out before the blaze began. I made a copy of the footage and stored it on a secure drive. Then I went back through Karen's HOA newsletters. I cross-referenced times she had been unaccounted for, statements she had made to neighbors, anything that would build a timeline. She had made a mistake. Several, actually. And while she still believed I was just a reclusive neighbor with a stubborn streak, I was building a case, brick by brick. The next HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige box of a building that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old coffee. The turnout was solid, which was no surprise. A car fire in a neighborhood like ours didn't just spark gossip, it lit a full-blown wildfire. People were hungry for drama, but more than that, they were nervous. They wanted to know if it was random or if it was the start of something worse. Karen sat at the front of the room, centered behind a long folding table with 2 other board members flanking her like bodyguards. She wore a crisp, cream-colored blouse and a calculated expression of concern. Her voice was calm as she opened the meeting, speaking about safety, about vigilance, about how tragedy sometimes brings communities closer together. No one mentioned my name directly, but everyone knew who she was talking about. She made references to recent acts of destruction and unfortunate losses, then pivoted into a speech about the importance of full HOA participation. Her logic was thinly veiled. Join the system, or risk becoming a target. It was fear marketing at its most shameless. I let her talk. When she opened the floor to questions, I raised my hand. The room quieted more than I expected. Karen's eyes flicked to mine, then held steady. She gave me a nod like this was all part of a game she had already won. I have a question, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Has the board considered asking residents to submit security footage? Maybe pool resources to help identify whoever was responsible? She blinked once, the only sign of discomfort. We've encouraged everyone to remain vigilant, she said smoothly. But we don't want to create paranoia. I smiled. I wouldn't call it paranoia, I'd call it evidence. I've already collected some, actually. You'd be amazed at what neighbors are willing to share when they think someone might be targeting their property next. There was a subtle shift in the room. Heads turned. Eyes settled on Karen, then back to me. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Let's stay on topic, she said quickly. This meeting is about unity. Exactly, I said, still smiling. And the truth tends to unite people better than threats ever could. She didn't respond, but her fingers tightened on the edge of the table, and I knew she had finally started to worry. I waited 3 more days before making my move. In that time, I double-checked the footage, had the accelerant analysis quietly processed by a friend in forensics, and confirmed that the substance matched a brand Karen had ordered for landscaping use just weeks earlier. I even found the receipt in a community newsletter she had sent out, proudly promoting bulk discounts she had arranged for HOA members. She hadn't even tried to hide it. I knocked on her door just before sunset. The light was soft and gold, throwing long shadows across the porch. She answered quickly, as if she had been expecting someone but hoping it wasn't me. Her smile was brittle. "Officer," she said, voice light. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I raised an eyebrow. "Officer? That's new." She faltered. "Just a joke. You've got that presence about you." I stepped forward slightly. "You're right. I am an officer. A detective, actually. Embedded in various roles over the years. Drug cartels, weapons trafficking, organized crime. But lately, I've been trying something different. A little less dangerous. A little more local. She didn't speak. Her expression held, but her eyes had already started to shift, scanning for escape, calculating whether this was a bluff. I pulled out a small tablet and tapped it to life. The video played without sound. Her walking up my driveway at night. Her standing on the porch. The quick run as the fire bloomed behind her. The hoodie. The item in her hand. The exit. It was grainy, but clear enough to make the shape and timing unmistakable. She stared at the screen for several long seconds, her lips tightening. "You don't have proof," she said finally, voice thin. "I do," I replied. "Multiple angles, accelerant match, timeline, motive, a pattern of harassment documented from day one, and let's not forget the attempted coercion tied to your HOA authority. It's all very tidy, almost like a textbook case." Her bravado cracked. "This will ruin me. You did that to yourself." She turned, as if to walk back inside, but I stepped into the doorway. "It's over, Karen." She stood frozen for a moment. Then she asked, almost a whisper, "What happens now?" I looked her in the eye. "Now you find out what it feels like to be powerless." She didn't resist when I handed over the evidence and made the call. Karen didn't go quietly. She tried at first to hold on to her poise. When the officers arrived at her door later that evening, she opened it with the same polished expression she wore at every HOA meeting, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But when they informed her of the charges, the change was immediate. Her voice cracked before her face did. She asked if there had been a mistake, tried to laugh it off, asked to speak privately with the lead officer. He shut that down fast. The neighbors began to gather, one by one, drawn by the flashing lights and rising tension. Some stood at their windows. Others stepped onto their porches, arms folded across their chests. They didn't say anything, but I could see it in their faces. The slow realization, the disbelief giving way to a deeper understanding. The woman who had run their neighborhood with fear and false charm was being taken away in handcuffs. Karen's panic fully set in as she saw them watching. That, more than the charges, seemed to undo her. She called out to the crowd, begging them to listen, saying this was a misunderstanding, that someone had set her up. She even turned toward me, her voice desperate, accusing me of framing her, of targeting her from the beginning. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The evidence had already spoken for me. One officer gently guided her into the back of the patrol car. She tried to dig in her heels, claimed a medical condition, asked if someone could call her lawyer. The door closed, muffling her voice, and the cruiser pulled away slowly, leaving behind the sound of silence and the flicker of taillights fading into the street. The neighbors stood for a while, unsure of what to do next. A few looked at me, unsure whether to thank me or fear me. I gave a small nod and turned back toward my house. I wasn't interested in victory laps. I had only done what needed to be done. Karen had tried to make a spectacle. She ended up making an example. Karen was formally charged with multiple counts of property damage, criminal harassment, and attempted coercion. Her bail hearing was quiet, procedural, and brief. She stood before the judge looking like a shadow of herself. Gone was the confident woman with the clipboard and too tight smile. Her hair was pulled back, her voice subdued. When asked how she pleaded, she whispered the word "not guilty," like she barely believed it. The prosecution moved quickly. With the evidence already lined up and the added weight of her position in the community, the case had the kind of clean narrative that made it easy to pursue. She had abused her role, targeted someone who resisted her control, and escalated until it crossed the line into criminal behavior. What made it worse was the paper trail. Every letter, every unofficial warning, every veiled threat in HOA minutes painted a clear picture of intent. I didn't testify in the first few hearings. I didn't need to. The video footage, timestamps, forensic reports, and witness statements did most of the work. But eventually, I sat in the courtroom and answered questions with calm clarity. I explained how I had documented her harassment, how I had gathered the footage, how I had used my training to quietly investigate her actions without alerting her. Her defense attorney tried to paint me as an aggressor, someone who baited her or pushed her beyond reason. The judge wasn't impressed. Karen's attorney requested a plea deal once it became obvious the evidence was airtight. She agreed to a reduced sentence in exchange for admitting guilt and agreeing to step down permanently from the HOA and all community leadership roles. The judge added restitution to cover the cost of my destroyed car and a public apology to be delivered at the next community meeting. When she stood at the clubhouse and read her statement, it sounded more like a hostage letter than an apology. Her voice trembled, her hands shook, and she never once looked up from the paper. The crowd was quiet, polite, but no one applauded. Justice had been served, not with grand gestures or headlines, but with patience and precision. I had seen worse, dealt with more dangerous people, but there was something uniquely satisfying about watching someone fall on the very rules they tried to weaponize. After Karen's departure, the neighborhood changed in subtle but noticeable ways. At first, there was an awkward silence that hung over Pineview Estates like fog. People didn't know how to act. For years, they had either feared Karen or played along, hoping to avoid her attention. With her gone, that tension evaporated, but it left behind uncertainty. Without someone constantly enforcing arbitrary rules, residents had to figure out what kind of community they actually wanted to be. It started small. A few neighbors began planting flowers in colors that had once been frowned upon. Someone put up a wind chime. Another family painted their front door a shade of blue that definitely wasn't in the HOA palette. No one said a word, and that silence felt like permission. The HOA board restructured. Two of Karen's closest allies resigned quietly, citing personal reasons. In their place, new members stepped up, people who genuinely cared about the neighborhood but weren't interested in control. Meetings became less formal. There were open discussions instead of lectures, suggestions instead of demands. It felt less like a courtroom and more like a conversation. Neighbors who had kept to themselves began to show up at meetings. They introduced themselves, shared ideas, and asked questions. There were disagreements, of course, but they were honest, respectful, and rooted in a desire to live together rather than manage one another. As for me, I stayed out of the spotlight. I attended one meeting after Karen's apology, said a few words to clarify that I had no intention of stirring further conflict, and let them move on. I wasn't there to take over or be celebrated. I just wanted what I had wanted from the start, a quiet place to live. One evening, weeks after the dust had settled, I stood on my porch and looked out over the neighborhood. It was calm. A couple walked by with their dog. Someone was grilling. Kids rode their bikes without being told to slow down. The air smelled like barbecue and fresh grass. For the first time since moving in, Pineview Estates actually felt like home. Looking back, I never expected a quiet neighborhood like Pineview Estates to test my patience more than some of the criminal organizations I had infiltrated. But the truth is, control can wear many faces. Sometimes it comes with threats and weapons. Other times, it shows up in the form of policies, passive-aggressive notes, and a clipboard. Karen wasn't a criminal mastermind, but she believed she was untouchable. That made her dangerous in a different way. I had spent my career dealing with people who thought they could manipulate or intimidate their way into power. Karen fit the mold more than she realized. The only difference was the scale. Instead of running a racket or trafficking weapons, she was using a homeowners association to enforce her own warped version of order. She wasn't trying to hurt me at first. She just wanted to control me. When I refused, she escalated. When that didn't work, she tried to destroy what she couldn't bend. The fire wasn't just an act of revenge. It was the final move of someone who had never been told no and couldn't accept losing. She thought I was just another resident she could pressure into submission. She had no idea I'd been trained to spot patterns, gather evidence, and wait for the moment someone crossed the line they couldn't walk back over. What happened in Pineview reminded me that justice doesn't always arrive with sirens and arrest warrants. Sometimes it comes in the form of quiet persistence, of watching and waiting until the truth reveals itself. Karen got what she deserved. Not because I chased her down, but because she exposed herself. The neighborhood is healing. Slowly. Honestly. And for now, I'll keep my badge tucked away, my cameras recording and my porch light on, just in case.